All right. So this was the example that we were looking at. Any question here? We wrote this program, and instead of a class called account, we created our own example. Okay? And then it talks about each class begins with an access modifier, and we call it public. They are called the access modifier. It's important for you to know because you might be asked this question in your quiz. Okay? And then, of course, it has the file name .java, and every class declaration contains the keyword class followed by immediately by the class's name. So public, class, and the name. So that's basically what it's describing over here. Then it says identifiers and camel casing. Any question there? Identifiers are my attributes, variable, and camel casing, big, small, all right? And as long as you follow the naming convention, you're fine. You can name it anything that you want. Talked about instance variable. Those are the attributes. I used another term called attributes. You'll hear that term as well. So these are objects or classes attributes. So an object has attributes that are implemented as instance variables and carried with it throughout its lifetime. So instance variable exists before methods are called on an object. Does that make sense? So I created those things. It is there before I even created my object, right? While the methods are executing and after the methods complete execution, okay? A class normally contains one or more methods that manipulate the instance variable that belong to a particular class objects of the class. Which one were the methods of that example that we did? Give me the methods. Did we create any methods?
Yeah.
Yes. Which one?
On the first or second class.
Doesn't matter.
Well, on the second class would be the sets and the getters.
Right. So the sets and the gets were those methods that we created. Those are the getters and setters. Now I could create my own methods as well. And then we talked about the instance variables are declared inside the class, and each object or instance of the class has its own copy of each of class's instance variable. Now this statement is very, very important because you just saw when you use the second object and the third object and you called on those instance variables and those methods, it gave you the right information. It did not get confused with the one that you did for object one, right? Or the class. So that is why this statement is very, very important. This is the power of object-oriented programming. You define it once. Now you create your object, you add with a dot notation, and it will create its own copy. So anything that you want to do with it is not going to be confused. You will, and we will talk about inheritance later on, you will see when you actually create those objects, you can define its own attributes and add more methods to it. So it will already inherit some from the top of the parent, but you can create your own. But we will get there when we talk about it. All right, and then we talked about some of the good programming practices. You know, you should be listing them in the beginning. All right, access modifiers. We already talked about it. Remember public, private. There is also another one called protected. Okay, there's one called final. Okay, basically, as the name signifies, public lets you see everything. Private makes it very private. Nobody can see it. Protected is somewhere in between. It is not quite public, but it's not quite private. Okay. Set methods. Any question? Now, if you use the default, you don't have to worry about which one is void and which one is returning. The way I used to get very confused in the beginning, but then I started thinking about the name of the method, set method and get. When you say set, that doesn't return anything. Set is to put some values in, but when you say get, that's when I return. So every time you see a get method, you will probably see there's a return statement of in the body of that method. It is going to return. And in this case, it was a simple return. Just the value that you take, you just take it. But there could be more calculation that you would do, and then you would return that value. All right? Parameters are declared in a comma separated parameter list. Okay? You can have multiple parameters. Okay? Now they're saying parameters are local variables. So they are declared in the body of the particular method, are local variables and can be only used in that method. All right, they are local. When the method terminates, the local variable also terminates. But remember, each object has its own copy. Okay? All right. Set method, set name method. So again, every method's body is delimited by a left and right brace. Remember the body of the method. In Python, it used to be the indentation, right? In Java, you can do indentation, but it really is the curly bracket that makes it an entire block. Okay? I think in Python they call it the suite, yeah. All right. This was the question that you brought it up. We could have avoided the need for the keyword this here by choosing a different name for the parameter. Okay? In line, but using this keyword as shown is a widely accepted practice to minimize. But you know, it's completely up to you. Name method, again, get name, and I kind of went over the individual method. You have to understand what that method means, because as soon as you see a get method, you have to say what kind of value you're going to get back, because if you take that value and do some kind of a processing, you need to know what kind of value you're getting. If you try to get a value which is a string and you want to do some calculation, the calculation is going to be all wrong, because you cannot do any calculation on a string. It has to be a double or integer. Okay? All right. Anything here? No, I think this is pretty simple. All right, set and private, we talked about that. They often provide the public methods that allows the class's clients to set or get private instance variable. That is the good way of programming. You do not want to make everything public. So this is my driver class. This is also sometimes called the driver class or the test class. And a lot of times you would see that they would name it as the name of the class and account test. In this one, we made this. Now, I want you to do something. The ones that you did were all hard-coded. Can we make this interactive?
Definitely.
Absolutely, right? So only thing we got to do is this. I'm going to have an input over here, my scanner. Remember, input is my object, scanner is my class, new scanner system.in, and then I'm going to ask the question. This system out print of initial name is so you can ask the question, please enter a name. Then you use the next line method to take a string value, store it in this variable called the name, and then I'm going to say my account dot set name. So my account is my, remember this is the name of my object. So just like my PC computer 1, 2, 3. So I'm going to associate that dot set name pass the variable that I'm storing in the name. You guys with me? So I remember in the program that we did, we actually came in and hard-coded these things. Dell computers, black, 256. I can define a scanner. I can ask a question, please input your brand name. Associate that with my PC computer object, and then call my set brand name and pass that variable that I stored that value. You with me? Yes? No problem? All right. And we'll do that. And then you will get something like this. So scanner object receiving value from the user, no problem there. Instantiating the object, we talked about that. You know, that's when you create an object and a constructor. Now we're going to talk about constructor in just a minute. Okay. So get name and the default value of string variables. You know, this one basically talks about when you define a string, what's the default value there? The number argument must match the number of parameters. You know, this is basically telling you if you say you're going to pass in 2 values as a parameter, then you have to pass in 2 values. If you say it's going to take it as a string, you have to take it as a string. You cannot put in an integer for that. So that's basically what it's telling you. It has to match exactly the way you define things. That has to match this. Okay, command. We'll look into the UML component. Before we do that, we want to guys take a 10-minute break. We'll come back and we're going to create a constructor. I'm going to show you how to create a constructor. And then we'll go into some UML, Unified Modeling Language. This is basically taking what we are saying programmatically, but creating, using a tool or using a Word document, a Unified Modeling Language diagram. So let's go ahead and take a little break here.